Alright, hello and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be going over my first round of game recap from the Melbourne International Open, a new sort of annual tournament that I believe is going to be held every year in Australia, and definitely, at least with the current state of chess in this country, it is the strongest tournament we have. The way this tournament works basically is you have to be at least 2,000 FIDE to enter. There were 4 or 5 players who managed to make the cut who were under that, but they were deemed by the organizers strong enough to play, and basically for that reason, it wasn't going to be an easy tournament. I just barely managed to make the top half, but as you can see, plenty of titled players in the tournament. And for the first round, actually, I was paired against, I believe, this candidate master from Hong Kong. And actually, there was just a tournament right before this one, held in Canberra, another city in Australia, called Dobro Cup. And he actually played quite well there. He lost one game, but it was to like some Armenian Super Grandmaster. So definitely in good form, and I knew this was not going to be like an easy game. But okay, coming into the game, of course I did some preparation. I checked out what he plays with white and black, and I decided to open up with 1d4, which is what I usually play, and after knight of 6, d4, e6, all stuff I had sort of anticipated, I decided to go for g3, sort of saying I want to play the Catalan, which is like a very important part of my repertoire. Of course, you can go knight c3, but then you allow the Nimzo Indian. So okay, I decided to go for g3. He plays d5, bishop g2, and we get a Catalan. There's also some other options though, like black could play c5, and hope that after d5 you have sort of a Benoni, but because white's committed to a fianchetto, it's not exactly the best version of it. White can also go knight f3 though and sort of avoid that. There's also, for example, a bishop b4 check. This goes into a Bogo Indian, but okay, d5 is sort of the most popular move. I go bishop g2, bishop b4 check, and the most popular move is bishop d2, but I'd done some preparation before the game and decided that I'd want to go knight d2 in this position, and after castles knight f3, he has an option already between either d takes c4, where you can sort of win a pawn, or you can go for this move b6, fianchettoing the light squared bishop, and this is probably more of a solid option compared to d takes c4, I would say. But okay, I've done some preparation for both of these moves, and white has a bit of an option here. They can either castle or they can go for queen c2. I prepared this move queen c2, and there's sort of a tricky idea here where if black goes b5, they can't really hold on to this extra pawn for that long, because after a4, if they go c6, it's actually a really big mistake, because, well, if you want to try and pause the video, actually, I recommend you to try and do so. But the basic idea is that white can just take, and after takes, not knight e5, because then black can go knight d5, but instead knight g5, and now the point is that if you go knight d5, well, you blunder maiden 1, so what that really means is black is kind of screwed, because how else do you defend this rook on a8? It's not entirely clear. I don't see a way unless you break the laws and physics of chess. So basically what that means, and well, is that b5 it's not actually like that bad of a move. This is what was played in the game, but after a4, you basically have to contend with the fact that you're not going to be able to hold this pawn on b5. Most people who play b5, however, in many books, for example, people call b5 a mistake, because the most logical way to follow it up after a4 seems to be c6, but then it falls for this trap that we see after these moves. However, if after b5 you go for something else, like bishop b7, you give back the pawn and stuff, or you play what my opponent did in the game, b takes a4, it's actually not that bad, despite the pawn structure kind of looking a bit weird. If black can go bishop b7, quickly develop, followed by going knight bd7, c5 maybe, they can sort of make some exchanges and liquidate the center, and they're actually not doing that bad. So, the most popular move, I think, after this queen c2 thing, though, it is to go a5. This is what I played quite a few years ago when I faced this in an over-the-board game. But b5 actually isn't that bad, as long as after this position you do not go for c6. So what happened in the game was b takes a4, and obviously I have quite a few options at my disposal here. I can take on a4, I can take on c4 for the queen. I obviously cannot take on c4 for the knight, but I thought that was the recapture I wanted to do the most. Bringing my knight off of d2, where it's on kind of a passive square. So I castle, and now a5 happens. I think bishop b7 was like a little bit more accurate, but okay, a5 is also a sensible move, sort of freeing up the rook a little bit. Maybe it can come here, maybe like a bishop can also come there, or something like that. So okay, I take on c4, bishop b7, and already in this position I made a very natural looking move, but one which was in fact a bit inaccurate, I decided to play rook takes a4. But the issue was that after bishop e4, where black sort of establishes their bishop on central light square like this, I really do run the risk of basically my opponent just taking complete control over the light squares. For example, like queen d5 was one of the top engine moves, and like if I go b3, like this might be c5, counterattacking the center, even just knight c6, rook d8, attack the d4 pawn. And if you really take a moment to observe, the reason black is doing completely fine here is because white cannot easily advance their central pawns, which is where we have sort of a pawn majority, because of, again, of black's very nice light square blockade in the center, you could call it. So also in this position after queen d5, I think during the game I did see this, but I really underestimated after knight cd2, where, okay, I'm attacking their light squared bishop, and if they retreat it, like I can just move my knight or something, and this is very dangerous, right? The issue is that they can actually give up the dark squared bishop, but then keep like this very strong control over the light squares, and they're doing completely fine after knight d7, maybe c5 again. So after queen d1, which is why I felt very much compelled to play, because if like queen b3, I forget if I had like a real big reason why I didn't play this, like whether it was concrete, but this kind of looked awkward. I felt that like a bishop might be coming back to d5, and a very likely continuation might be like to repeat the position. So I didn't really see much need in, or much purpose in going to b3. Maybe they have even something better like queen d5 again though. But okay, yeah, already rook takes a4 was a bit of an inaccurate move maybe, and that sort of begs the question, what should I have played instead? And of course, the first thing to understand is that there's not really a big rush right now in trying to really grab this pawn. It's not going anywhere, of course. I'm not an idiot, I understood that, but I didn't really quite foresee how important it would be to really control the light squares in the center, and with that, a very strong move would have been to play bishop g5. And a very important concrete point is that now bishop e4, if you do this, this doesn't really quite work well, because white can start this forcing sequence with queen takes e4, knight takes e4 takes, and now because of this pressure on this diagonal, I have knight g5, and I'm going to be winning material. If they take this, I win the exchange. If they play f5, this is bad for quite a few reasons. At the very least, I can take e4, but I can probably also take e6, and again, not very good looking for my opponent. If he plays h6, I can just give up the bishop. I don't know why chess-base wants to do that, but in this case, I can now play knight e5. I do give up my light squared bishop, but I do gain nice control over the light squares. Now I can put my queen on e4, maybe I can take here, and long term they sort of have this weakness of the a5 pawn to deal with. And also, if after like bishop g5, let's say they just play some natural developing move like this, I can again sort of do a sequence like this. I can't quite remember analyzing this, but yeah, again, they have a pawn on a5 and some kind of weaknesses they need to deal with. So yeah, bishop g5 would have been the correct idea, but unfortunately the rest of the game actually wasn't very eventful, because after this, I actually misspoke, sorry, there was an event later, but at the very least for now, it seemed like there was going to be very little kind of chance for me to do anything after c5. Like, usually you would want to go d takes c5 and initiate this sort of queen exchange with the hopes that this endgame has some sort of chances to you, because if they take here, then like you just take and you win a pawn. But the issue, of course, is that you run into bishop c2 and you lose everything. So I couldn't really do that, and that sort of begs the question, what do I do? So obviously I'm probably going to keep the tension, and I did that. I played bishop f4 after thinking way longer than I should have. I thought like 40 or so minutes actually, which is ridiculous. It makes no sense. But for some reason in my head, I thought like, you know, I could come up with something somehow, spending a lot of time on bishop d2, for example, opposing this bishop like so. Of course, if they take, then my idea would be to go for something like take, maybe take on b4. I'm not completely convinced with this though after knight c6, when my rook feels a little bit awkward, but let's say if I go here takes, and I like take. This sort of position was what I was thinking about, where I wasn't actually really sure I had enough here, because like, okay, this pawn is maybe slightly overextended and maybe I can attack it and stuff, but I wasn't really convinced this would be enough to really play for a win. But compared to the game, this is definitely a lot better than what I got, and I think I kind of maybe slightly underestimated just how difficult this would be for black to actually maybe, like, let's say, defend this b4 pawn. And also, I should mention, this isn't even forced, they can even go knight c6, so a lot of the calculations I was doing just like straight up kind of on variations that probably would have even never happened, to be quite frank, and I should have just made a decision a lot quicker and just accept, like, objectively, no matter what I play at this point, it's not actually gonna make a big impact on the position. So I played this at some point, and okay, like, let's say if knight c6, this is like one of the few hopes I have in the position, I can go bishop d6 and like maybe win a pawn, right? My opponent's not an idiot though. He played c takes d4. He can also just develop knight to d7 where it protects this, so bishop d6 is not really a big issue now. But okay, c takes d4 is what he played, and after queen takes d4, he doesn't take, because then that would help activate all my pieces. And actually I have some chances with like all my pieces sort of in the game compared to black's at least. Unfortunately though, you know, this is chess not checkers, so he can go knight c6 and force me to now release attention. And like I could avoid a queen exchange, but I don't necessarily think that makes it easier to win now, because like, where am I gonna move my queen, right? Like, I'm gonna move it backwards? Like, no, I'm gonna lose too much time doing that, so I just decided to exchange queens. And no realness, this is just like very, very difficult to make anything of. And I messed around for a few moves, started rerouting my pieces around, but then he played this knight d4 move, and this was very interesting. So I think already around this point, both of us had like 15 or so minutes. I don't know why we didn't have like any crazy critical moments or anything like that. But knight d4 is very interesting, because if you notice what I did in the previous move, like, my bishop is attacked, so I'm smart enough to realize that you probably should move a piece that is attacked so you don't lose. So I did that. And then I created a threat of knight b6, forking this and this, right? So some very like high level concepts we have going on here. And then black plays knight d4. And black was thinking on an even higher level. They're like telling me like, Sam, you can go for knight b6, right? And I was very tempted to do that because I see I'm winning material, obviously. But my opponent also had a very interesting concept in mind where they're like, if you play knight b6, well, I'm going to take your pawn, I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to take on f4. And then if you take back, basically, you're going to have a very crappy pawn structure, and you may win my exchange on the next move, but like, this position where your pawn structure is really bad, it's going to be very difficult for you to win, because like, how are you going to promote to like a pawn in the endgame? It's going to be very, very difficult. But I really couldn't resist, because I had so few opportunities in this game really to create anything. Maybe my like best opportunity was on move 11 to play bishop g5, but after that I really had nothing, and I was so desperate to do something. I ended up playing knight b6, even though I knew it had some risk, because let me make one thing clear. After these moves, I can also play knight takes c8, but I thought this is like very, very risky to go into this when like this is just going to be losing material. So g takes f4 is pretty much forced, and after this, like, it didn't really click how dangerous this was actually though for me until like we actually reached this position where like, if I want to go rook c1 for example and challenge this rook, like, they can just take this, and this sort of doesn't really even lead to anything because they can go here. The engine actually says this is probably the best way to play, and after 95, like, somehow I'm sort of holding this together, I guess, because of like 97 threats, but like, I didn't really in the game handle this so well, especially because I was like really, I think like around 5 minutes on the clock at this point, like really proper low on time. And after my next move, I played my f rook to c1, which was actually a big mistake, and I probably should have just been like dead and lost after this. I had the audacity to even offer a draw. He rejected because he knew that like he really has nothing to risk in this position. And my idea was that by using the f rook to give the check, I could at least take the pawn on a5, but this was all stupid, and after knight takes f4, like, I don't know what I'm doing. This makes literally zero sense at all, because like, if I can't even put my rook on a8 because the bishop is covering that square. That was one thing I actually missed, I think. I was very lucky that this didn't happen. So also backpedaling a bit, like, instead of going for this knight b6 thing, what I wanted to say was that like, I could go the safe route and just play knight takes d4, we exchange a bunch of stuff, and we get a draw, right? I mean, the computer might say like minus 0.1, but realistically, no one's winning this. Maybe I can even take the pawn on a5. I'm not sure if that was completely forced there. Maybe they take on c4 instead, so yeah, that looks more logical. And yeah, no one's losing this. I hope not, at least. So knight b6 is what I played. Again, I was regretting this very soon after I made the decision. And you know, like, knight d4 wasn't a blunder from my opponent, by the way. This was a very, like, I could tell when he made the move. He obviously is not stupid enough to overlook this. He thought this out, and for someone of his level, actually, it's a very good sign that they're even considering such possibilities where they give up material in exchange for like this sort of positional compensation, because it's a very difficult skill to master. And it definitely shows a very high level of play if you are able to sort of make these sorts of moves and tempt your opponent to make these sorts of decisions. And he would have been very well rewarded for it, but unfortunately, like after this, he started doing some weird stuff like 97, and he's still much better, but like, I don't know why he didn't just take this. He must have overlooked something crazy. There's not really any real purpose to this. I bring my rook back because I realize, like, holy crap, he's like attacking this and stuff. Where do I move my knight? If I go backwards, I just run into maiden 1. So I'm like, okay, I need to protect this, but I hang b2. And now I'm in this position where technically equal material is equal, right? Because like I have an exchange for a minor piece, but he has 2 pawns. But of course, the points don't necessarily tell everything, because like his pawn structure is very compact. I have these 2 isolated pawns. My pieces, especially my minor pieces, they're very difficult to untangle them. And I was really crapping my pants here. I wasn't expecting in my round 1 game against and no offense to my opponent, of course, but like some 2000 rated kid that was going to be like, potentially losing. I wasn't expecting this at all. Of course, it was somewhat my own fault that I ended up in this situation when I could have just taken a much safer path and just being like, okay, round 1 draw, not too bad. But instead I end up in this situation where I'm like just getting absolutely walked over, and was already thinking, like, realistically speaking, I've already lost this game. I just don't see how I'm gonna like hold together my f4 pawn. For example, you put a knight there, you move your pawn up 1 square, you put your bishop on d6, you attack f4, you put your king on g7. I don't see how like black doesn't win this. But I was very lucky because next 2 moves he starts making some inaccuracies, and he might have missed knight g1 here. I'm not completely sure. Basically only move to survive. I'm actually not sure rook b2 is that great, because that gave me this small kind of opportunity to untangle, and I was very lucky for that. After takes, maybe didn't have to exchange it. Maybe you can like keep the bishop on the board. I think this is still like winning though for him. Knight d5. I need to protect the f4 pawn somehow. I wasn't a big fan of rook f3, because then I was thinking like he can go bishop d6 with tempo, attack f4. At least with rook c4, I thought I could keep this bishop stuck to the back rank a little bit longer, because now with bishop d6, I give a check, and I can at least like repeat the position, right? Maybe if I'm feeling very ballsy, I can even go f5 or something and really try to push the envelope, but I'm not sure I actually would have done that. Okay, so he plays rook b3 though, cutting my kind of king off from the 3rd rank. I go king f2. I think, yeah, if I go knight f3, he just simply has that, so I need to respond to that threat. I go knight e2, and I prefer knight e2 over knight f3 because I just simply want to protect the f4 pawn. He starts moving his rook around a little bit, and okay, I need to be careful here, because if I just take it, obviously I'm losing big time material. If I play something like I move my knight away, I don't know, keep the tension. But one, there's knight takes f4 check, but there's also just takes, and knight e3 again. So yeah, king f2, I felt like I had to do this. I was slightly concerned at first that then I would be ending up with a weak pawn here, but it's not super easy for them to attack quickly, because if they attack it, then I give a check and they're forced sort of back to square 1. So he ended up going, avoiding the rook trade, going rook a3, keeping 1 pair of rooks on the board. And again, this is tricky, because now I can't really go back, because then he would actually have this check. So he sort of like wasted the tempo to try and like trick me to do something bad, and it almost really, I think the black is still winning here. I don't see myself holding this, especially after rook e4, which I played in the game. I thought after knight f6 I was really just busted, because if I go to e5 back, then knight g4 check forks out, and that if I go to e3, that's even worse. I just lose a rook straight up. So I thought this might be my only move, but then knight g4 check, I saw this, and I was like, well, I don't really see how I'm surviving this, because king g2, knight e3, if I go like backwards to g1, then there's going to be this rook a1 check thing, and if I go rook c1, take, bishop c5, I'm done for. If this happens, bishop a3 also looks pretty freaking bad. Rook d1, knight e3 is a point. I think I might have a check, but still, I can't imagine this sort of being survivable. And I think I should also say king e1, then at the very least they can grab h2. And once they have 3 pawns for the exchange, I just don't see how that can possibly be working out. But I was very lucky, because bishop d6 is played. He didn't go knight f6, and this gave me some hope. So I played rook d4. I played this with the aim of avoiding knight f6 with tempo. Now, of course, that just loses the bishop. And somehow I was sort of starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I can actually survive this. So okay, he played rook a2, he sort of pins me, I want to get out of that. If he comes back, I'm just going to repeat the position, of course. So he tries doing this weird stuff with his bishop. I never really understood what this was for. And now I bring my rook to d3, actually, so I sort of secure this rank and also this rank at the same time. So sort of my rooks are playing a very interesting defensive role now, and it was actually very difficult for him to make progress. I think the computer still says like in all these positions he's better, but definitely it's not as clear cut. He wasted a lot of time, and eventually like he also pushed his h pawn up. I was thinking like he could at least like use his king and like put it in this way or something, attack my h3 pawn. I wasn't completely sure how I was going to deal with that. I thought h5 was sort of taking squares away from his king. Sorry for that. But yeah, this happened, and I just sort of am like, okay, like you're the one who has to prove something. I'm just going to be moving back and forth. But once the rook moved to b1, I'm like, well, I can maybe go knight g3 and put a knight in e4 and maybe make it a little bit more active, because before I couldn't really do that because this rook h2 and I cannot defend that. But now with the rook on this first rank, now I can go to g1 because the h1 square is covered. So he went h4, and I didn't go knight e4 because I was concerned, for example, that in some positions like the rook would sneak up behind and then just attack f4. Sure, I can maybe go knight f2 and hold this position together, but it seemed very passive, whereas e2 felt like a more like multifunctional square, you could say, where it actually like helps again defend this very important weakness of e2. And you know, some people might say like, oh, like that's so passive, but remember, like at this point I'm not playing for a win. I've already accepted long ago that this is going to be a draw at best. So it might be passive, but it's what I have to do. I go again just backwards, and at this point I was thinking like, do I just like move my rook again or something? But I realized like, you know, if the bishop on e7 instead of f6, like I can just go knight c3, exchange the knight off, or at the very least they go back, and well, then I might even get my own active counterplay. So he decided to exchange, but at this point, yeah, with just the bishop now, it's very difficult, I think, to really properly attack this f4 pawn. And after a few more moves of repeating, we agree to a draw, because realistically, no one's going to win this. You know, I could try and maybe, for example, like do something like this and avoid the checks to the back rank, but then the rook's going to come to a4, and I mean, realistically, there's no way to really make progress. I can go king f3 and try to use my rooks in the 7th rank, but again, not really going to happen. I think they're going to play bishop d6, counterattack this, maybe this, and it's going to go on, and no one's going to make progress. So all in all, like, it should have been a lot simpler of a game, really. It should have been like, I didn't get anything from the opening, I play knight takes d4, we exchange a few pieces, draw, agreed. But instead I was a maniac and decided to really make a big risk trying to win the exchange when the horizon position just was not, yeah, I don't know what I was thinking, what types of drugs I was on, but luckily he misplayed it. And the thing you also have to understand is that I could look at an engine and say that knight b6 is just as good as knight takes d4 because the engine evaluates them similarly, but the problem is that to hold the position after this is so much more difficult than to hold the position after like this, right? So you can't just look at the engine evaluation completely and think that the engine says this is 0.1 and this is also 0.1, so that means they're the same. That's the wrong way to look at it. You have to think about how easy or difficult is this position to play as well. That is equally as important as the objective evaluation. But okay, that's pretty much it for the round 1 recap. I'll actually bring up the results real quick. So probably one of the wildest first rounds of a tournament I've seen in a while. None of the top 4 seeds won. 3 of them drew and 1 of them even lost, which is absolutely nuts. So, and if we come all the way down to board 19, this is where I was. Managed to get away with a draw. Not something you'd be thinking if you're in the top half round 1. Getting away with the draw would probably be your opponent usually, but okay, that's what happened. And there was even a forfeit. It was wild. It was like, I don't know really what's happening, but yeah, ultimately a little bit lucky. And for round 2, I have to think for a second, who did I end up playing? I ended up playing, I played Sho Otsuka from Japan, actually, where I actually lived for a few years. I think he only started getting into chess once I already kind of left the country, so I didn't know him super well. We actually got dinner after our game with some other people, but yeah, I won't spoil too much about that if you don't already know the result. Hope to see you guys next time, and yeah, hope you enjoyed the video.